Now I'm calling on stage first the moderator of this session, Yves Eudes. So Yves, thank you. Jim Roberts from New York Times and Peter Bale from CNN. So now it's your duty. There. Yes. Take this place. Yes. So, your duty now.
Good morning. So my name is Yves Eudes. I'm a reporter for the newspaper Le Monde here in Paris. Now, the title that was chosen for this session is quite dramatic because it goes Obituary, the death of the traditional news story. So, okay, maybe that's it, rest in peace, but maybe not. So the first reaction that comes to mind will be, is it true? Is the good old news story that we used to love so much really dead? Or will it survive alongside newer and flashier ways of spreading the news? And the second thing is, if it is indeed dead, then is it a problem at all? Now, to answer all these questions and many more, first would like to welcome Jim Roberts, the assistant managing editor of New York Times. I understand Jim joined the New York Times about 25 years ago, so he can tell us a lot about the long process of bringing in old media into the new and flashy and sometimes scary world of the internet. So, Jim?
Thank you, Yves, and bonjour. Shall we begin?
It's all yours.
Okay. We do a lot of hand-wringing in this business. I think that's part of the job description. And there's plenty that we should be worrying about. There's limits to press freedom, access to information, violence, intimidation, the risks to our correspondents in the field, the constant financial pressures we feel, the ever-widening field of competitors for the eyes and ears of our audience. The one thing I don't worry a whole lot about is storytelling. You know, when this topic was proposed to me, I didn't know whether I would be here to either refute the notion that the story is dead or to support it. So I probably will try to find a middle ground here somewhere, but I thought this illustration would be at least a starting point. But I personally don't worry a lot about it. In fact, I'll tell you why. There are a few caveats, they will come. Whenever I talk about this subject, often to young journalism students who are very worried about their own job prospects, my response is unequivocal that we are in a golden age of storytelling. Now, financially, that may be another issue. It's obviously hard to monetize, hard to keep the business going, but the point remains that the tools that journalists have today to employ their craft, to tell their stories, are infinitely flexible, limitless, and the smartest journalists that I know are the ones who are really capable and flexible in using these tools and not fearing to experiment with more unconventional ones. This, of course, strikes fear into the heart of a lot of journalists these days, traditional journalists particularly. I still know print photographers who resist using video cameras. And while it seems that virtually everyone is using Twitter in one form or another, I've engaged in a number of pitch debates with reporters and editors about really what truly constitutes journalism, and certainly whether Twitter or other forms of social media do. And even some of the youngest and smartest reporters that I work with, you know, seem often to be more worried about where their story, and I should put big quotation marks around it, whether their story is featured on page 1 of the print edition. I I don't want to overemphasize the question of what tasks a journalist should be performing. I'm not one of those who insists that every journalist must write an article, must shoot photographs, must run a blog, must be capable of producing video and using Twitter. But I do think that there's a significant risk in narrowly defining what the work of journalists is, or what we call a story. And here are a few things to just think about. Is this one? Here's a list of mostly tweets and Instagram photos. A collection of photos gathered from throughout the web, or a selection of comments. I'm a big fan of Taiwanese animation. Is that a story? For those of you in the United States, from the United States, you'll know Jon Stewart. Maybe he travels overseas as well. A lot of people get their news in this way. Flipboard, another interesting piece of software that delivers information in a very different way. Amateur videos, YouTube. There was a time when this certainly was a story, so I don't need to ask about that. And I certainly think that this is one today. I could probably find another 100 or so of these examples, but I think you get the point. Taken to the extreme, I think editors like myself and my colleagues must consider everything from a Lady Gaga tweet to a stream of uploaded footage about Gaddafi's execution to the outpouring of YouTube videos about the massacre in Hula, as at least being part of the story, if not the story itself. And I really hope that everyone is now ready to accept that we must be as comfortable communicating in 140-character tweets as we are in producing 4,000-word articles. A number of news organizations, including my own, have managed to deal with the flood of information, video, images, live blogs, internal news feeds, that attempt to present and filter these streams. For breaking news events, I think a number of news organizations, including my own, have found some ways to try to pull this information together, filter it to an extent to try to get rid of the noise and find the best signals. You'll see these are, I think, a few very good examples of some of the major news organizations that have attempted to do that. It is still a challenge, though, I think, to learn how to incorporate this better in this sort of real-time unspooling of events into the main narratives that we present on websites and devices. And it's also clear to me, and I'm sure most readers, that even at their best, these types of live news blogs or news feeds are lucky to come close to matching the speed that Twitter is able to react to events. And I was just thinking back just a few days ago when the United Nations Security Council was meeting an emergency session to deal with the crisis in Syria. I personally found it faster, in some ways easier, to follow the events as they unfolded that day through Twitter than I did through any of the conventional news sites, including my own, that I use. And this brings me to one of those caveats that I wanted to mention. At what point do people start substituting Twitter, Facebook, these alternative means of delivering news for a conventional news homepage? I found it fascinating that in the McKinsey study that one of those central points that we were hearing is the surge in the number of people who are using some form of social media as their gateway. I find that incredibly sobering, maybe even a little scary. Does that become their news homepage? Has it become their news homepage? And if so, what does it mean for conventional media like my own that has done a lot, tried very hard to adapt and create vital and vibrant portals for news itself. But just for a second, I do want to get back to storytelling, because I do think that it's worth taking a second to think about the embarrassment of riches and opportunities that we have to use technology to deliver the news. I'm sorry, I should have clicked on these earlier. One thing that we have tried to do is find, a number of ways to incorporate a lot of other elements of journalism into the narrative presentation as we create it on the web. Some of this, I think, has been driven smartly and helpfully by tablets. The news reading or article reading experience that tablets have provided, I think, has opened the eyes of many people to the value of that rich, immersive experience. I find it interesting that on the one hand, technology is pushing us toward, again, bursts of information in 140-character tweets, but yet is helping create apps like the Atavist, other sort of long-read applications that really do make the process of consuming news in a much fuller fashion to be very, very rewarding. A lot of our multimedia specialists have been working on trying to do this at the New York Times. I wish I could. We were trying to figure out a way if I could get this actually online, because when you go into an experience like this, a simple PowerPoint slide doesn't really capture it. When you go into an experience like this, many of the multimedia that you see on the left-hand side will sort of open up as the article spools out, so that images, graphics, video do appear in the context in which they are presented. We've also experimented a little bit with using brief video clips within an article itself to sort of create a modal experience as you work your way through the text of an article, where video can really help expose a certain aspect to it. This was a piece that we did on autistic teenagers a few months ago. It used that technique to great effect. This was also a very compelling piece of long-form journalism. I cannot begin to count the number of words. It was at least 4,000 and possibly even 6,000 when it was finally presented. We put it together as one piece, but again, as you worked your way through the article, you had the ability to click on all sorts of supporting material, documents, photos, and what have you. Again, a much fuller and more immersive experience that, again, technology has allowed us to do in a very gratifying way. For the Times, working with video has been a particular challenge for us. It's not sort of central to our core journalism. It's been something that we've attempted to tell stories through. This was a project we did very recently. We also did it in text, but video formed the heart of it. And just as in the previous slide, we were trying to integrate supportive articles, documents within the body of the text, we've attempted to work the same mechanism with a piece of video like that. All of these things, I think, are very helpful. I think they will help make users' experiences better. I think that as we think about the way media is emerging these days and the trends of consumers, that there still remains a healthy appetite for the storytelling experience. I don't know that the article on the tombstone that I showed earlier, is something that can survive, and certainly in the present state. But I do think that there are a lot of opportunities for the richness of that experience that people are avidly consuming these days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. So since I will only have two speakers for this session, I think we'll keep the questions for later. So now I'd like to welcome Peter Bale, who's the Vice President of Digital at CNN International. Peter.
Thanks, Yves. Good morning, everybody. We do these kind of debates all the time at these kind of events. Are newspapers dead? Will tablets take over? Are we all out of business? And should we all just quit now? So I decided I would challenge this classic obituary style a little bit and say, actually, maybe that's no bad thing, assuming my clicker works. I think probably all of us are guilty, particularly people like me who've been foreign correspondents for a very, very long time in the olden days, and gone into countries, gone into stories, and not necessarily told it in the depth that was really required. Have we always respected our sources? Have we always gone as deep as we should have and explained their stories, and recognized also that they would read them as well? And I want to excite you about what the opportunities are at the moment. It is about storytelling, as Jim said, and it is about technology, as Eric from McKinsey said, and it is about all of those incredibly exciting things that we saw yesterday. The guy from L'Information, who is changing the face of the way the news is displayed. We are in the middle of the greatest transition that any of our industries has ever been in before, and it is an exciting time to be. It's no time to be complacent. And one of the things that this subject really got me thinking about was a piece from the New York Times about in 2009. And as an old fart from Reuters, an old fart foreign correspondent, which was all I ever wanted to be until the internet came around, this piece really moved me in 2009. I had to go back and find it using the absolutely superb New York Times search engine, which put ours to shame. And it's a piece by an Indian correspondent of the New York Times, based in India, going to a very small village and reporting on people. And there's a truth in it. There's a sort of an inner hidden truth that our sources are our readers as well, and we need to respect their access to our content. We need to respect the access and the accuracy of our content in a way we perhaps didn't before. And I'll just read this out. I hate people who read their presentations, but it may help for the translators. It's a momentous, overlooked shift in the world. Foreign correspondents no longer cover one place for the exclusive benefit of readers somewhere else. In the internet age, we cover each place for the benefit of all places. And the reported on are among the most avid consumers of what we report. They can see our stuff. We've seen this in the US. We've seen this with bloggers questioning what's been reported about them. And we see this now in places like India, where internet access and so on means that these people are no longer sources to be gone and exploited, reported on, and treated as though they weren't part of the conversation. These people are active parts of our conversation now. So I think when we talk about the death of the story, some stories deserve to die. The ill-informed, 600 or 900 word story that we used to blow into a town to interview the taxi driver, and if we were lucky, the hotel guy on the way in, is no longer acceptable. I've done it. I'm sure some of you might even admit to having done it. So I wanted to address a couple of themes. Storytelling, we would have thought we were sitting in a teepee listening to some sort of ancient story if we'd used this word. It's become a very popular and I think rather romantic and beautiful word to describe what we do. And there's a few components of that I just want to address, and I was very delighted to hear some of the people yesterday address, because it'll make me sound a little less pretentious by using them. One of them is witnessing. And by that I mean the courage, the risk that it takes to bear witness, to go to dangerous places, but it also means to truly understand what it is that you're doing. And both our readers and us can bear witness on stories. And it's about creating. Again, a bit pretentious. We're journalists, we're hardworking, we need to push it out. But the creativity that is available to us now to tell stories in more sophisticated ways is extraordinary, as you saw yesterday and as you'll see from mine. Now, my buzzword, the one that I love, is curating. My daughter, who is 19, says to me, "Dad, it's just editing. You're just putting a new word on something old." And there is a certain element to that. But our ability to curate different asset classes is what makes this different. And to curate the entire long tail, the history of a story. Every source we ever had for that story, we can now plug into our story if we wish to. If people want to, they can go incredibly deep on stories. And it's no longer that 600-word, once over lightly, there I was in Belgrade when something horrible happened. Experimenting. You saw some terrific experiments yesterday. We need to have the courage to experiment, the courage to get things wrong, the courage to do data visualization that doesn't quite tell the story as well as you wish it did, and learn from that. And the really nasty one, the elephant in this room, monetization. So I'm going to be incredibly vulgar today and talk a little bit about monetization at some point. The McKinsey thing is extraordinary. The percentage, the percentage of activity on social and the tiny fraction of revenue on social at the moment. We have to get real about this. Facebook is not going to sit back. Facebook's own CPMs fell by about between 11 and 15% in the first quarter. We have to get after them, and we have to do that through all of these elements, but in our advertising as well. Now, one of the things that sometimes frustrates me at a conference like this is that somebody like me will come in and they'll say, hey, I've just discovered the cure for baldness on the internet, and you can use it as well. It's not like that. So these are themes that, I don't want to come in and say CNN's got it right. CNN is trying to experiment. We certainly bear witness on these stories. We're certainly experimenting around monetization. But I don't want to suggest that we've got it right. I'll show you some experiments, and I'll just tell you a little bit about how we're trying to do this. But the answers to these questions are in this room, not necessarily in CNN. So these are 4 themes that I've been thinking about a lot since I joined CNN about 9 months ago. And it's about curiosity. One of them is about curiosity. And it's taking television away from hard news, in a sense, and say, what kind of people are interested in news? And to some extent, it's about curiosity. Why has Discovery Channel done so brilliantly with its theme weeks, with Shark Attack, plane crashes, that kind of thing? It's because people are curious about what's next, what's happening. And believe me, there is money in what's next, as I will explain in a moment. Community. 4 or 5 years ago we had community editors, we now have social media editors. It's the same thing. It's about attaching to groups of people, collective groups of people, seeing your readers in a more graduated and complex way. iReport is one commitment that we've made, but well before I got there, so I'm certainly not taking credit for it. Of course, I will take credit from now on. But it is the most extraordinary investment by a major media company in true connection to citizen journalism, if you like. Curation. It would be wrong if I didn't include this. I think the opportunities for both algorithmic and edited curation by highly skilled journalists are absolutely immense. Algorithmic curation is crucial. We simply will not be able to do the volumes of curation and make the associations that are necessary without it. And I don't just say that as a former Microsoft employee. And capability. This is what we all have as news organizations. We've built extraordinary capabilities inside our organization. And for me at CNN, a lot of that means TV. What can TV contribute to the online experience? And of course, a lot of that is video, but it is our reach, our commitment, and the authority that we've built up over the time. The bit that we have to learn, I believe, much more is about listening, is to not just be on broadcast the whole time, which is very difficult for a broadcaster. Television is the essence of the one-to-many. And so teaching the organization to be more responsive is one of the biggest challenges I think we face. So I'm just going to show a piece in a moment. I'll play the video in just 1 second. This is a piece that, again, I can take absolutely no credit for other than that my team supported it. This is a piece that Meredith Artley's team in the US did. They have a special projects team. It also reflects these themes of curiosity. This is an important story, but it is done at length, it is done in a sophisticated way. It is not your average 600 or 900 words over or a quick 30-second live or 10-second live from some hellhole. This is going to that hellhole, explaining that hellhole, living with those people for a while and going deep. I think there's also an aspect here about the campaigning, the advocacy. It was brought up by the guy from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation yesterday. CNN is moving into this incredibly risky area of advocacy and campaigning. I mean, slavery is a fairly easy one to campaign against. There's very few people in support of it. But it is an extraordinary mission by the company to use its reporting resources to expose this problem. And if the chaps will let me, I'll just play you a little piece of video on this, which is far more eloquent than I could be about it. Would you play the video, please? So I find that one of the most extraordinary and moving pieces of journalism that I've seen since I've been at CNN. You know, I'm a fairly hard-nosed journalist, and I'm now also a fairly strong commercial person. You know, that is a heart-rending, powerful piece of storytelling. It is not just some guy on the end of a pier in a cyclone in Virginia saying the storm is coming. And it requires real commitment to go and do those kind of stories. But the storytelling, the article that we can do around that is so much deeper. We can talk to people, we can engage with the readers about what they can do about it. We can use data visualization to explain it, to really bring home the true horror. So all of these assets are available to us to tell this one story. It's no longer a single piece of video. It's a place for engagement, it's a place for dialogue, it's a place for explanation, it's a place for education even, without being boring. It's about curiosity. So putting community at the center of what we do, or social if you like. We simply could not cover the world the way we are now without iReport. It is an extraordinary commitment. It has nearly 1 million contributors around the world. We're just investing a little more to bring some more people into London to drive it. This is more than just running, you know, pictures of skateboarding dogs. This is a truly effective way to cover the news. We simply couldn't have covered covered the Occupy Wall Street protests in an international and effective way without it. I mean, the Indignados in Spain happened to be my particular favorite branch of the Occupy movement. But through this story, we had real people telling their stories, again, not just from downtown Wall Street, but from Lisbon, and my personal favorite was one from Reykjavik. If you can get an iReporter contributing from Iceland about a worldwide movement like Occupy, you're starting to explain that there's something a bit more there than just a whole bunch of irritated people. The London riots as well. Again, we simply could not have covered the London riots as effectively as we did without iReport, without exploiting the advantages of everybody now having a camera in their pockets. And I'm amazed at the extent to which people were prepared to commit to this. Again, we are not the BBC. We are not necessarily the recognised news brand in the UK. But here we are with terrific, powerful and effective images to tell stories delivered by users. So we really appreciate their help. Curation is something, as you've heard, that I believe is a core strength, both algorithmically and as a new sort of editorial concept. We've always done it. We've always brought additional sources in, but now we can disclose where they come from. We can show what they are. CNN bought a company last year called Zite. Z-I-T-E. If you have an iPad and don't have it yet, I would encourage you to download it. You will start to see the impact of Zite become more evident on the main US site fairly shortly. It is an algorithmic curation engine which brings in an amazing number of sources and is a very powerful tool. Personal curation. This is using our intelligence. This is some of our Davos coverage. Instead of just having our own people tweeting, we assembled Twitter lists, and this is not a terribly sophisticated thing to do, but Twitter lists of the 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 people that our people think are most important to watch. Muriel Rubini, Paul Krugman, people like that, bringing in other voices into the mainstream of our reporting. So if I can also talk about the advertisers, and I know this is vulgar in this room to talk about making money, but all of these storytelling assets are available to advertisers and available to us to tell the advertisers' stories well. And the only way we in the news media, if you like, are going to differentiate ourselves from the likes of Facebook is to tell advertisers' stories more effectively. Now, this is one that will possibly horrify some people in this room. We do a lot of creative solutions, what are called specials, on CNN, particularly on the international side. It is by far the bulk of our revenue, and it is the only way that we can compete effectively with much, much larger sites and achieve very high CPMs because they're tied back to television. And in this particular case, the Breguet watch manufacturer has a particular feature of their watch which allegedly was designed by Leonardo da Vinci. It was based on a design by Leonardo da Vinci. So within this video, within this special environment, we created a product which linked with the ad. Could you play the video again, please? And I'll talk you through this one because it doesn't have any sound. No, that's the Nokia one. That's coming in a second. It's a much better video, actually. No, okay, we don't. Could you just move on? I'll move on the slide. But if we can play the Nokia one when I get to the Nokia bit, would be really good because that's a really terrific video. And sometimes, so I can explain the Leonardo da Vinci one is the mechanism in the watch is explained within the ad unit, but then the discovery of a few more Leonardo da Vinci paintings are discovered in the story. So it's getting the message of the advertiser across in a way that isn't gross, that isn't intrusive. Okay, now this is what really happens when you fall in love with an advertiser. I'll explain this one second. So I was sped into that one a little faster than I was prepared for. But that's what can really happen, I believe, when you get an advertiser that has a commitment that is very close to your corporate commitment as a news organization. You know, Nokia, we all know, is in a little bit of trouble right now. But its slogan or its attempt at the moment is to connect the next billion. We know that the next billion will not be connecting on laptops through broadband. They'll be connecting on mobile. That's a very, very powerful thing. Nearly the majority of the CNN.com page views in Africa now are coming from mobile. It's an absolute phenomenon. You know, all of those things that we see about the growth in mobile in Africa and the way it's bypassing landlines is absolutely true, and we're seeing it now in our products. So that's why I used that Nokia example, because it's a way in which we've come together with an advertiser to push our mission for our report without compromising our editorial principles. And I think that is the kind of partnership that I think more and more of us will be doing, as Eric from McKinsey said. Thanks very much.
Is this working? Okay, so thank you. Peter, I have a question for Jim now, because you did mention that video has been a big challenge for print media such as the New York Times. Can you tell us more about the logistics and give maybe a few advice to less advanced newspaper in this field?
I'm not sure what advice I could give other than it's a lot harder than it looks. We have experimented in a variety of ways at the New York Times in video, and I still consider us to be in that experimenting and learning process. And I don't mean to be glib. Each day that I learn more about it, my respect for those people in the TV world grows. The complexity, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Everything that I think should take 2 days takes 10 days, that sort of thing. We're still finding our way. We, as a news organization, immediately, when we started doing video, we immediately gravitated toward the types of video that we considered to be sort of central to our understanding of journalism, which, you know, is some form of documentary coverage. And over the past 5-6 years, tried to do a number of things that incorporate many of the elements of narrative storytelling. What we are now trying to do ourselves is learn how to get beyond that, how to experiment, you know, how to actually get in a little bit, dare I say, into the more conventional news business.
Did you train your own people, or did you hire new guys?
We have strictly stuck with our own people. We have not yet, at least in terms of training people within the newsroom. Now, certainly people who are on the, you know, the production side, the creation side of the videos, we have brought in from either the documentary world or more conventional TV.
So you expect your print reporters to carry cameras on the field?
All of the work that we're doing in terms of talent comes from the newsroom itself, and that's been an interesting experience unto itself.
Now, one quick question for Peter. Yeah, you mentioned the curator a couple of times. So is it a full-time job in your mind, or is it something that is one extra chore for the reporters?
I think the concept of curation is everybody's job, and they need the right tools to do it well. When I was at the Times, I bought an editing system called eScenic, which people here may know, which is absolutely fantastic as a curation tool to assist journalists. They need the algorithms, they need the good searches to do it, but then it's the judgment layer that they make on top. You know, we all assemble our stories from a variety of sources. We now can show all those connections, and so I think it's everybody's job. I think it's the homepage team's job to think about the further connections on those stories. But I think that the job of curation starts from the moment of creation. The moment you start writing the story, you should be thinking about the associations that you want to make with other content and with other sources.
Great, thank you. So maybe it's time to take questions from the audience. Here, a microphone maybe. Give you mine. If you don't have one, I'll give you mine.
Good morning, my name is Jonathan Marks. How do you say thank you to the audience?
How do I say thank you to the audience?
Yeah, how do you involve them?
To our audience or to this audience?
Yeah, CNN.
So I would say iReport is a very effective way to thank them, because it is you know, people love to have their contribution recognized. There's a genuine dialogue with an editor once it is approved. So I think it is a very meaningful contribution. It isn't just like sucking it all into an email address and then saying, thanks for this, we're about to move your content around the world, would you now disappear? Lila King, who runs iReport, has made putting the personalities of the people who contribute to it, made it a very significant aspect. We've introduced some sort of gamification on it recently, which is about badges, a sort of Foursquare badge if you do something really interesting, and there's the opportunity for others to rate you. So those rating mechanisms and so on are very familiar. I think we just changed our comment policy as well, where our editors can now go into comments much more actively and deal with conversations and enter those conversations. So I think in some of those cases you get a lot less trollism, if you like, if the journalist or somebody else with a little bit of patience and hopefully no drinking can go in and address conversations full on. But I think you're absolutely right. Saying thank you, finding ways to communicate with our audience in an authentic and human way is very, very important.
Good morning, Jim. François Dufaux. Jim, I still would like to read the New York Times on a PDF on my iPad, and I would like to know why you never put it. The real New York Times, the one I've enjoyed to read.
Okay, that's a valid question, and we hear it from a number of people. And I do know that a number of news organizations, at least that I'm aware of in the United States, have done versions of downloadable papers. I mean, there is a facsimile version that I can show you that is available. I would still like to convince you that there are maybe slightly more rewarding ways of consuming the content of the New York Times that is, that runs the gamut from, apps, website, what have you. I do think that our tablet app, creates an experience that is a little bit closer to a more conventional print experience. But I can show you offline how to do that as well.
If I could just add something to that, I think one of the most innovative products that's out there in this area is the FT's HTML5 iPad app. The FT did not want to pay the fees to Apple, and it wanted to maintain the relationship with the user. And I think that's a very interesting compromise towards where you're talking, because it is the authentic product. So it has all the richness, but it's maybe consumable in a slightly different way. I think we'll see a lot more like that.
I'll also send you print. I'll just send the print editions to you.
Will you?
Oui, bonjour. Jean-Philippe Moinet.
Jean-Philippe Moinet, founder of a young magazine that started in print before it dipped moderately and entered the internet. 2 questions about what you said. I think you have a lot of certainties. Well, from what I've heard anyway, about the wonderful world of new technologies on the one hand, and the wonderful world of video or images. We may wonder, I think that someone like Robert Dampton, heading the Harvard University Library, and you took part in discussions on digitizing written forms, would be more nuanced. And to be a bit provocative, we could believe that the end of the 21st century, in a world of speed and an overdose of images, maybe the fact of coming back to traditional writing, storytelling, could be something that will happen. Do you have a question? Yes. Aren't your certainties too overwhelming?
Of me?
Not really, not both
good.
of you. And like, you're full of certainties and maybe feels a little crushed by all these certainties, so maybe you'd like to respond in a more general way.
I don't know about Jim, I am certainly not full of any certainties whatsoever, other than that the speed of change is accelerating, and you better be on it. You know, but what I am certain about is that we have to still find ways to monetize this stuff. We cannot accept the constant erosion of our advertising revenue by billions upon billions of perfectly targeted advertising now coming through Facebook. It is an immense threat to us, not from an attention point of view, although it is a threat in that respect, but it is an immense threat from a revenue perspective. And that's, you know, that is one of the things that we really have to address, is how to continue making money. But so I apologize if I sounded in any way certain about anything.
So, Jim, maybe one word about crushing certainties?
Well, yeah, I agree with everything Peter just said. I guess the other certainty that I have is not just that that we have to adapt, but we also have to experiment. I think that what we've seen in the 17 years of the transformation of this industry, and in particular what I've seen just in the last 2 years, is that the way people consume information, news, and information changes by the day. If we had this conference 4 years ago, no one would have uttered the word Twitter. In very possibly 2 years, we would not have been talking about it to the extent that we are now. I think that, you know, everything that I do, every waking minute that I spend thinking about journalism, I think about how people are consuming it, how their patterns are changing, and how we have to be ready to go with them. We cannot, and this I will also say with certainty, we cannot dictate to them how they consume news. We have to understand how people want to do it and how they expect it to be delivered to them.
Excuse me, you've talked a lot about Facebook, but which is your relationship with Google, which is also a competitor and a friend? How do you deal with that?
Well, in my case, I love them both. You know, Google, I've had many different relationships with Google in different publishing roles. Right from the very start, I have believed it is one of the most important sources of traffic, one of the most important partners, one of the most effective partners, as is Bing. But you know, so for us at the moment, search engine optimization is one of our weakest positions from an engineering point of view, and we need to do something about it. I regard the traffic that Google can bring, the interpretation that it can bring through the remarkable power of Google News, and also the way Google has learned a lot in the last 6 years or so about its relationship with media. The fact that Google now recognizes other people's brands within its searches, that it recognizes that some people want to run paywalls, so that it runs a first-click free system or similar things. Google has really matured in its handling of the media, and I've been immensely impressed about the way they've done that. But what we're facing right now, I mean, when I joined MSN about 5-6 years ago, we were at Microsoft facing this enormous glut of very, very well-targeted Google advertising. And we kind of got through that. CPMs did suffer, revenue suffered for us all. But now it's a very different thing. The percentage of the amount of very, very well-targeted advertising that is available on Facebook, they've got fantastic people like Carolyn Everson running their advertising. They will get very, very heavily into the display business. The deal they've done in the last 2 years with Diageo, where virtually all of Diageo is Smirnoff, for example, biggest drinks brand, biggest drinks company in the world. All its online advertising will be done through Facebook, and it will start to really knock your socks off. So Facebook is an incredibly, again, to quote my daughter, which I frequently do on this, she said to me the other day, "When are you going to get a social app, Dad? When's CNN going to be in Facebook? I'm reading the Washington Post and the Guardian all the time." You know, and she is my Facebook of my focus group of one, so I listen to that.
Let's take another question. Oh yeah, I don't think I guess again, if I were to add anything to what Peter just said, it really dovetails with what I said earlier. I do agree. Google has done a much better job of working with news organizations of recognizing not just brands but quality of information as opposed simply to the algorithmic ranking. But it's one of those avenues that, again, I feel, as I said before, we cannot ignore. That's how some people consume information. We have to be there. The next question.
Hello. Hi, Vivian Norris. I'm a contributor to BBC Online. Vivian Norris, contributor to the BBC Online, but also Huffington Post, and very, very active on Twitter. I have questions for both of you. How is iReporting supplementing or even replacing paid correspondence in certain situations, and how has that changed the news? And the second one actually linked to a New York Times article this weekend over Fukushima, in which New York Times complimented the outside the mainstream media in terms of keeping the story alive. And what would you say about that?
Yeah, I would hope that iReport is not displacing any existing correspondents and any staff. What it allows you to do is engage the audience in a much bigger way. There are incidents where we simply wouldn't have had coverage from agencies or from ourselves. Fukushima is a very good example, or the Japanese tsunami is an extraordinary example of how effective iReport became, because there were just so many people in so many different places. So I would hope that the answer to that is that it doesn't displace them. It only adds to that.
But the risk exists, right?
I think that isn't the intention, and certainly isn't my intention. I think it's additive rather than negative. We have made, CNN has made some pretty bold decisions in the last 2 years to do much less with the AP and with Reuters, which I think is a very complex decision, but is all about us owning a bigger percentage of our own content because we need to own it on other platforms. And iReport, you may be seen as a way in which we can compensate for the loss of some of that reach. But that's not the intention.
The only thing I would add to that, during my presentation I flashed the slide of Gaddafi being captured and executed. Very vivid day in my memory. There certainly were no correspondents at that scene when that, or no accredited correspondents, if you will, at the scene when that took place. Yet we all have a very visceral sort of understanding of that event. It's a bit fragmented, a lot of blurry videos, but again, they were done by amateurs. They complemented the work that we do day to day, and of course, where we as journalists contributed to the process of storytelling in that case was the efforts that we made to verify and authenticate those images. If you recall, during that day, several hours of time, if I recall correctly, elapsed between the time the first images showed up and the time that we really felt comfortable saying, okay, this happened, he is dead, and those are photos of his death. So I just think that was a very good example of where citizen journalism told the story in a way that traditional, conventional journalism never could.
Okay. Next. Yes, I'm Alexander Pratt from La Presse in Montreal. My question is for Mr. Roberts. Is there a plan at the New York Times to produce live news video programs?
We actually already do, and thank you for asking. Now, they're not CNN. I don't know exactly how I would describe that, but we have begun to experiment in a number of small ways in doing live video on our website. We started only a few weeks ago doing a twice-weekly show devoted to coverage of the campaign. We do it at 1 p.m. New York time. It's presented on the homepage of NewYorkTimes.com. It's also available, it soon will be available on our news apps as well. So yes, we will never be CNN or a conventional broadcast network, but we feel that we have something to contribute. We do a lot of news gathering in real time, and we'd like to learn more about presenting it in video in real time.
Peter Vickers from the European Broadcasting Union. I want to just come back to the money, and possibly this is more a question for you, Peter, I guess. Could you just talk to us about, with your two advertisers, Breguet Watches and the Da Vinci Story, and then the Nopia app, could you just talk about the general area of sponsored news, conflict of interest, you know, what if something terrible happens and you should be reporting a difficult story about Nokia or Breguet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is something we guard this area extremely strongly. It's particularly, I think it's particularly an important area for a US organization where particularly the New York Times, there's a very, very strong separation between church and state in American organizations, which is often not the case necessarily elsewhere. Every now and then there is a judgment call that is necessary about whether something is too close to advertorial. So we also run advertorial. But it is very clearly marked as such, and the sourcing is very clearly marked as such. I think for the consumer, a lot of this is about transparency. Who is paying for this stuff to be put in front of me, and why? And if you're very, very transparent about that, I think you can get away with a lot in terms of explaining it well, and also having some quite powerful content. The Nokia one goes much deeper than just an app. I think it is awkward sometimes if you have an insurance company sponsoring an insurance conference and your coverage about insurance. I think that is a little bit difficult. We also do a lot of business with commercial and editorial work with countries, with nations. So we have, for example, a thing called Eye on Poland running at the moment, which is done in partnership with the Polish government and people who want to promote investment in it. But we still have a free hand editorially. But I think that it's a large part of it is about transparency, and then also having the right checks and balances within the organization. I've been very impressed in our organization how deeply and finely the balance between church and state is understood within the organization.
Paul Islier from Russia Today. The question is probably for Peter. Today there's a whole array of TV networks out there, Russia Today, France 24, Al Jazeera, and it seems often that we're all competing for the same listeners and viewers. How has this increase in competition to what the scenario was, say, 5, 6, 7 years ago, changed the way you run your newsrooms?
Yeah, I've only been there 9 months, so I won't necessarily explain that, although I could probably make some assertions about it, which is almost as good as explaining it. Personally, I think all of that experience, all of that competition is incredibly healthy. Somebody asked me last night what I thought about Al Jazeera, and I think it's been a wholly extraordinary and amazing contribution to debate, media openness and transparency in the Middle East, and I think that I wish the State Department would go back to its view of actually thinking it's a force for good rather than a force for evil. But the competition just has really forced us to be much better, I think. CNN International is thriving at the moment. There was a recent European media study, which is our equivalent of ratings, in which we performed extremely strongly. One of the things that I've really picked up, both from our own research and this external research, though, is that your web presence, your mobile presence, and your television presence have to be all connected, and weirdly they do complement each other. It is a fact that CNN viewers who also read us digitally or on mobile trust the television more, so it becomes a reinforcing thing. But I think the competition is extremely healthy, and as long as we all continue to employ more journalists, it's all good.